Greetings and salutations, everybody. Have another franchise review here. As stated last year, I am switching these franchise reviews from a single film per video to one single entry covering all films, especially if there are only 4 or 5 installments, such as with this franchise review, which is for Critters. Now, for those unfamiliar, and before we really dive in, here's some quick information, some quick non-spoiler information about the franchise in case you are interested in checking it out. If it sounds interesting, I'll give some information about where you can check it out so you can come back and check out the rest of this little recommendation here, which I will have chapters for and time codes in the description so you can shuffle around, which may also be helpful for if you've only seen the first 1 or 2 and you just want to see that portion, check out 3 and 4 and then come back. But at any rate, this franchise began in 1986 and our main storyline follows 4 films. Now there is a TV movie style kind of entry of this and a show from about 5 years ago, but they weren't received very well and they don't really seem all that connected to the original 4, and I'll get into that in just a moment, and they're difficult to even find anyways. There's like rights issues and everything. But heading into this project, I had, checking all these out, I'd seen the first 2 films several times back in the day growing up, and I revisited them along with finally checking out part 3 about a year prior to picking up this boxed set here. This is another Viper video shout out here, which also has the 4th installment in it. But I figured it was time to give those first 3 kind of like a rewatch and then finally check out part 4. The box set is also why I'm just kind of skipping part 5 in that show, is that the show I can't find it anywhere anyways, and I tried part 5 and lasted about 20 minutes. It wasn't good. Anyways, often seen as a Gremlins ripoff in a way. This was actually put to paper before Gremlins even went into production, but it's understandable that this would get kind of lost in the shuffle over the years with films also like Ghoulies and Hobgoblins and Munchies and so on, sounding similar in some ways, or at least one way. We got little creatures wreaking havoc. For Critters specifically, this involves an alien species called Krites, these little furry creatures with a huge mouth full of razor-sharp teeth and an appetite for, well, food, but, simply don't want to chow down on anything they can, but typically it's meat. And since we are, and I believe this is scientifically accurate, so no need to fact check me, I think we're 76.32% meat, they will eat us as well. Like I said, don't fact check that. Anyways, there's a ravaging little appetite which they appease by rolling into these little tribble-like or hedgehog-like balls so they can roll around from one meal to the next. If they see something they want, which is going to put up some resistance, they can shoot out these little venomous spikes, kind of like little tranquilizer darts, to take down their prey. These Krites are also known kind of throughout the galaxy as being an extremely dangerous pest, which bounty hunters are sent out to eradicate. And some of them, what happens in this film when we start out, escape and crash on Earth. Some bounty hunters are dispatched and to this small town where so they can make sure that they are dealt with. Sorry about that. Now this is just the beginning of the franchise, where we start from. And before moving on, a bit about the overall tone of these films. Humor being the main one. These films, none of them are to be taken too seriously. There's a lot of humor thrown into this one. Not so much as we begin, to call this an outright comedy, but enough for this to only be rated PG-13 and have a light tone. And as you can guess from the initial description, there is a heavy sci-fi lean in this one as well, as this does revolve around aliens. So we have a sci-fi horror comedy on our hands, which, as I said, I grew up watching the first 2 several times because outside of all that, this small town where these Krites land, Grover's Bend, it's just a nice little town. It's a nice little sleepy, borderline Hallmark kind of town where you actually like the characters, which helps with the fright aspect if you want, is that you want pretty much everybody to be safe. As I've mentioned before, when it comes to horror, I need to like enough of our main characters to not want any harm to come to them, making me scared for their well-being. And the Critters franchise really handles that well. This is one I would also say is a great introduction to horror, for little younglings in your life, as it has some scares, a little bit of blood, but again, PG-13, entry-level horror in my opinion. So, now that very long intro is out of the way, Critters 1, 2, 3, and 4 are on various services such as Amazon Prime and I believe Plex, but check out that Just Watch app because that's where I go to find out where things are playing. If you enjoy them, you can come back, watch more of this video as you work your way through those films. Okay, so that is the overview. Time to dive into these films as we start with the original Critters from 1986, starring the likes of some who you may recognize, such as Scott Grimes, Emmett Walsh, Dee Wallace, and in some smaller roles we have Lynn Shay and even Billy Zane. We also have Don Opper and Terrence Mann, whose names may not stand out to you, but there's a reason why I mentioned them, which I will get into a little bit later. Now, the synopsis for our first installment, our introduction to Critters, is as follows. A group of small but vicious alien creatures called Krites escape from an alien prison transport vessel and land near a small farm town on Earth, pursued by two shape-shifting bounty hunters. Now, this initial entry is one that I would classify as a near-perfect horror intro. It's quick, it's to the point, starting with seeing these Krites, escape and the bounty hunters being dispatched to take them out. Now, one clever aspect of these bounty hunters are that, like it mentions in the synopsis, they are shapeshifters. So we have them monitoring Earth transmissions to find a face for them to replicate. One of which chooses a rock star, while the other one has problems finding a face. They always seem to have problems finding a face that will actually fit them correctly. So frequently throughout the film, they end up kind of having like a sudden change into someone new. As they see a face that fits a tiny bit better, they keep swapping. They might show up as a sheriff, or in the second one showing up as like a Playboy model, or showing up as a town drunk, and so on. It adds a nice little layer to it. Now, the crash of these Krites is similar to what we've seen in like sci-fi films of like the 50s and 60s, something lands in the distance, being seen by the town drunk, Charlie, played by Don Opper, and of course nobody believes him, and the Krites eventually working their way towards town. We get a nice introduction to our main characters, such as the Brown family, which is where we have the Brad character, played by Scott Grimes, his sister, his father, and his mother, played by Dee Wallace. We get a sense of kind of what their life is like in this small town, a little bit about their personalities, what life is like on this farm, and little bits of humor thrown in here and there to keep all these introductions very light and fun to watch. Now, as this Krite infestation is taking its hold and the bounty hunters are on the case, they are working with the Brown family and this town drunk, Charlie, eventually to take care of the situation. Similar to if you had an infestation and an exterminator came by, explained what the creatures were, and worked with you to ensure your home was cleaned, they act the same way on this town, blatantly walking around in their outfits, shooting up Krites and so on, and not trying to stay hidden or anything. So, there's no sneaking around, it's all up front, right in front of everybody in town. But I would say the aspects of this film which make this a high recommendation, even if it's just to revisit it if you haven't seen it in 20 or 30 years, is how they pace everything out, both in the timing of bringing us up to speed as the audience, but especially in general. So first off, this is a short one. It's only about an hour and 25 minutes, so there's very little downtime, moves very quickly. It is scary, not a lot, just enough. I would say like a 7-year-old could handle this. It's got those things that pop out, those things that roll around and creep them out, but nothing over the top. And that's because it's funny, whether it's something around the dialogue or just how silly the idea of these little fur balls are. It's very lighthearted and has not like a B movie look, but like an 80s lower budget look to it. So you don't really want to take it too seriously. But especially what I really enjoy about this are the town and the characters within. Watching this, I really wanted everybody in this town to be okay after this strange couple of days with murderous furballs and bounty hunters. It's just a lot of fun. Which is why as a kid I was excited for the follow-up, Critters 2, the main course. For this one we have 4 returning stars, that being Scott Grimes, Don Opper, Terrence Mann, who plays one of the bounty hunters named Ugg. You may know him from Sense8 and possibly the Dresden Files. And Lynn Shay, who's popped up in so many things over the years, it's too much to even mention. So, the synopsis for part 2 is as follows. Eggs of the small but voracious alien creatures called Krites are left behind on Earth and, after hatching, set their appetites on the small farm town of Grover's Bend. Eggs! So this is an Easter movie. Like, seriously, it does take place during Easter, and there are scenes of kids coloring these eggs that were found. And while we are sadly missing Brad's family, such as Dee Wallace, Scott Grimes comes back to reprise his role as Brad, as his character had moved out of town, and now he's coming back to visit his grandmother. So, though not all of the surviving characters from the first film return, enough of those main players do to feel like this is like a nice return to this town. You know, since we already know Brad, we already know Charlie, who was out planet hopping assisting these bounty hunters, one of which also returns, Terrence Mann, while the second bounty hunter is still having issues keeping the form, so they're swapping out actors frequently. And we get a little bit of Lin Shaye returning in this as well. But, you know, we feel like we're right back at that same small town. We only need to introduce maybe a couple new characters, such as Brad's grandmother, somebody who used to go to school with, and is kind of like wannabe bully tough guy character. So we're able to just kind of get thrown right back into it. And I feel like this is a great follow-up because it doesn't retread too much of the previous territory. Simply, we got eggs were left behind, now they're hatching due to being discovered, kind of moved around, and ending up around heat sources. This is why our bounty hunters are alerting. You know, they are contacted because they didn't get all the krites, you know, and they need a return because of these eggs there, which also serves as a reunion of Charlie and Brad after 2 years. Charlie now being sober, since he, as he says, has a purpose now with these bounty hunters, which is a kind of surprisingly sweet little revelation that while he's still a bit of a bumbling fool in some ways, he's not a drunk any longer because he has meaning in life. But anyways, while not retreading too much of the first film, there are some similarities we have. You know, we have the infestation that needs to be handled. They work about the same amount of comedy within it. The stakes are a little bit higher in this one, in that now the critters seem to, or the krites seem to pose a greater threat, aka they have more budget to do more in this one. But standing out in this film is now that the whole town is kind of more involved in the extermination of the krites, working together to help the bounty hunters and such. You know, along with there being much more of them, we also get this cool addition to the krites in their abilities. As the poster shows, hundreds of them able to form into one big critter ball, rolling around and chomping down on whatever they roll over. It's a really cool thing that they added to it. So it is familiar enough to be a Critters film in the same small town, with enough of the characters returning to give us a fun second installment of how they built things out a bit and kept the same spirit as the first one. This surprisingly is one of those horror sequels that I have really high regards for, which I'd put up there with ones like Fright Night 2 or even The Fly 2. Different enough to be its own thing, but not so different to feel out of place, and especially touching on all the main aspects of that original story to still feel familiar. Now, of course, the krites are taken out, and the story concludes. Or does it? Because then, a few years later, an entry I didn't see until recently, Critters 3 from 1991. And while Don Opper as Charlie returns for some of the beginning and the end of this film, we also have our bounty hunter Ugg, Terrence Mann, returning for a very brief part at the ending as well. That's all we get is just the two of them returning. For the most part, it's new characters. Now, as the poster shows, this one takes a major turn in that we are no longer in a small town. Now, as the synopsis says, the tiny furball aliens that will lead anything or anyone set their sights on a Los Angeles apartment tower. Now, getting to that tower takes a little bit of time from the start, bringing us up to speed on this family that's driving past Grover's Bend, stopping because they had a flat that they need to fix. We get introduced to some other characters, one of which being Josh, played by a very young Leonardo DiCaprio. They briefly run across Charlie during this time, and we get some stories from him that he's recounting to some of these kids in this big flashback about the first two films, basically. But some of these eggs from Grover's Bend that had survived get stuck to this truck, and they are making their way to the city where the eggs will hatch, krites will reproduce, but in this case it's all happening inside of an apartment building. So our major swing here isn't as much the introduction of a different family and Leo's character, being the stepson of the landlord who owns that apartment, who's trying to evict everyone, but it's that we go from a small, quiet little town to an apartment building, which they are all trapped inside of due to this infestation of krites. Now, this one and part 4, I will say, are not as good as parts 1 and 2, but they are still a lot of fun. For this one, they change things up. They take us down a nice road to mix things up a bit. Otherwise, though I do miss Grover's Bend and the people within it, it would have likely been too similar to what came before it if we were in Grover's Bend yet again. It was nice that they kind of moved us out of there. And also that they did it by bringing us to an apartment. You know, being in an enclosed apartment gives a more claustrophobic feel. We get new characters, new challenges, but still doing their best to bring in those bits of comedy here and there. Still having some frights, tiny bit of gore, enough comedy thrown in to keep it light and to give us another short 85-minute film that's only PG-13. Honestly, my only complaints about this one is that the pace is a little bit off due to having to introduce some new characters at the beginning and getting us to that apartment. So it kind of seems to stumble a little bit during that time. I still miss Grover's Bend. I think that town was just really nice about those first two. I don't feel like we get enough Charlie in this one. You know, he just pops in at the beginning and at the end. But all in all, it's the only real direction I could see them taking with this to keep it fresh for this franchise. Until the end credits. We get a transmission from UGG, which is set up specifically to be continued for Part 4. So then we have Critters Part 4 from 1992. Now we still have Don Opper and Terrence Mann, both still coming back in very small roles, just like before. But surprisingly, of all people, we have Angela Bassett and Brad Dourif, one who does the voice of Chucky and played Wormtongue, as well as Eric DeRay, who I know mainly from Twin Peaks, and a quick bit of Anne Ramsey. No, not that Anne Ramsey, A1, the one who was in Brooklyn 45 recently, which I did a video for and I will link to at the end, of course. But not only that, this film came out just 1 year later in 1992, and the story for this one is set in 2045. In space, primarily at a space station. So needless to say, cryogenics are in play when it comes to these Krites and Charlie. So basically, you know, we have that same claustrophobic feel, but instead of being in an apartment, we're now in a 90s sci-fi cheesy, you know, space station kind of thing. Computer issues, spaceship issues, evil corporations and corruption, and there are some twists toward the end regarding UGG, which I was a bit disappointed in, but I understand the need to change things up. This one is also another short one, only 87 minutes, and it maintains a PG-13 rating and the humor, which made the previous three good in my opinion. Now, dealing with the tech on this station, getting lost, exploring, discovering these Krites, trying to handle the situation, and dealing with this company interested in them in almost a alien resurrection kind of way, which came out years later. They kind of dropped the cozy small town or the apartment tenants banding together in favor of a mixed crew, some of which simply want to survive, while others are trying to find a way to profit off of this situation of these Krites that they came across. Now, while this is the weakest of the four, I wouldn't say it's bad. I wouldn't call it good. I would just say it's okay. What ultimately makes this one work, and what makes it kind of work the best, I would say, is the fact that it sticks to that lighter tone of the previous three, builds out Charlie and UGG a bit more. We get a little bit more depth there when they are on screen, keeps the humor up, and honestly, and this is why 20 minutes into Critters 5 I kind of turned it off, besides it just not being good in general, is that Critters 4 feels like a bookend to the series. You know, it's wrapped everything up. I've got 4 of them in this box set, not a 5th one, either just because the box set came out before Part 5 or it just wasn't worthy of being in here. But it really wrapped everything up that these are the 4, the story is done, it's over. You know, we started out in our small town, we love the town, love the people, we build that out, go back to the town again, bring in a few familiar faces, introduce some new ones, take it outside the town, go to this, you know, apartment building out in LA, and then take it to space. You know, fast forwarding 50 years or so to outer space, space station, get out there where all this critter stuff had kind of begun in the beginning of the first film, and still have a small link to that original film with characters like Charlie and UGG. And then you put a stamp on the end that this is it. I feel like there's nowhere else to kind of go with the franchise, and that's fine. You know, it's all wrapped up in 4 films that are more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this latest little franchise review here for Critters, which at the time of this video is available on Amazon and paid rental. It might also be on Plex, but as usual, just check out that Just Watch app to find out where it's showing and what you have access to, because things change on streaming all the time. That's why I still collect physical media from time to time, not for everything, but just for ones that I want to keep in my collection. And again, regarding Part 5 in the series, they aren't really available anywhere at the time of this video, which should tell you something about it right there. The licensing, the story, it's just... Only Dee Wallace seemed to be connected, but her character had to do a name change, and I didn't stick around to find out much more about it. It wasn't really my thing. I feel like parts 1 through 4 give us a nice contained furry ball of a story. Anyways, that's all I've got for this one. Thanks for coming by and for sticking around to the end, as it does help out quite a bit. If you enjoy this, please give me a thumbs up, and if not already subscribed, consider subscribing. I have a link for Brooklyn 45 coming up in just a moment. That's another review worth checking out, another film worth checking out as well. As I mentioned, there will be another one I'm going to put up too that had Angela Bassett in it. I think it's the only other video that I've done. Maybe I think I did one for Wakanda Forever. But another one that she did in the 90s called Strange Days, which seems to be overlooked these days. That one's excellent as well. So stick around for those 2 links. Thanks for coming by, and I will see you in the next one.